What's going on, guys? Alex here, and today I'm answering your tax questions from Reddit. And today's question has to do with the 22% flat withholding rate that's generally applicable to bonuses and other supplemental wages at the federal income tax level. Let's take a look. This question comes from Midnight Sailors or Salers, and the subject is flat 22% bonus withholding rate too low, causing me to make huge estimated tax payment. I don't understand the 22% bonus withholding rate. If my tax bracket is higher than that, doesn't that mean it's being under withheld on this money and I will owe an amount to the IRS? This is a situation. Numbers are all made up. The bonus is less than $1 million though. My regular income is $400,000, which means a total of $110,000 in federal taxes, or $46.21 withheld per paycheck over 24 paychecks. In June, I got a bonus of $100,000. 22% or $22,000 was withheld. That means this year I made $500,000 but only paid X amount of taxes. Now it's October and I realized this passed the deadline to make an estimated payment for my June bonus, though I read it's still better to pay it ASAP if needed. Is my analysis right? Do I need to make an estimated tax payment or adjust W-4 for the rest of the year to account for this $13,000, or is the IRS okay with letting me settle at the time we file the return for the tax year? And why are bonuses under withheld? Do I need to make estimated tax payments for New York and local NYC also? This is a great question. And when I see the fact that you don't understand the 22% bonus withholding rate, I don't understand it either. From everything that I could grasp, it is an arbitrary number pulled out of the air, essentially, by Congress. And it comes from Publication 15. So if you pull up IRS Publication 15, you'll see that it deals with supplemental wages identified separately from regular wages. Essentially, that's saying if you are paid bonuses outside of your regular compensation, then essentially they'll be subject to this 22% rate possibly, which is denoted here. You have to hold a flat 22% rate, and there's no other percentage allowed. And if you choose that option, you have to go with 22%. There's another alternative here, but in many cases, your payroll department may just withhold that 22% rate and call it a day. What is the problem there? The problem is, if we look at the tax brackets for tax year 2020 for the single filing status, you could see that the 22% rate is right here and ends at about $85,000 in income, after which it's 24%, 32%, 35%, and 37%. So your observation is astute in that there may very well be an under withholding in a situation where you're in the higher income tax brackets and you receive a bonus. Unfortunately, this situation is quite common, and it always comes as a surprise at the end of the year as to why there's additional taxes due when there was withholdings happening throughout the year and you filled out a W-4, this, that, and the other. The reason being that 22% rate is generally applicable. So if you get paid a bonus outside of your regular paychecks, it'll most likely be accounted for in this way. So what do? There are a few options here. So at this point, if you missed the date to make the payment for the bonus that you received in June, then essentially you have to make that payment as soon as possible to avoid under withholding. Now, before we even get to that point, there are some safe harbors that are applicable based on your 2019 tax returns that may allow you to avoid penalties and interest from being assessed in tax year 2020. The way it works is a bit nuanced, but essentially, let's say your total tax liability, I'm going to assume you make more than $150,000 AGI in 2019. Let's say your tax liability at the federal level, your total tax was $100,000, right? And in 2020, you have all this additional income, and essentially, you will have withheld from your paychecks at least 110% of last year's tax. So let's look at it this way. If your total tax was $100,000 in 2019, you multiply that by 1.1. This is the minimum amount that you need withheld from your paychecks throughout 2020 to avoid the assessment of penalties and interest based on estimated tax payments. As long as you have at least this $110,000 withheld from your paychecks throughout 2020 based on your 2019 tax returns, that is how you achieve one of the safe harbors that will allow you to not pay penalties and interest. You will owe the additional amount once you file the return, but you will not be subject to penalties and interest if you meet one of the available safe harbors, one of which I just described. So to summarize, you take the total tax from your federal return from 2019. Since your AGI in 2019 was likely more than $150,000, if that is the case, then you multiply the total tax by 1.1. So if the total tax was $100,000, you multiply that by 1.1, you get $110,000. That is the minimum amount that you need withheld from your paychecks in 2020 to avoid estimated tax penalties. All right. So take into account those safe harbors. Don't freak out just yet. If one of those are applicable, then essentially you can breathe easy until you file your returns, at which case you will need to pay the difference in the taxes. So be careful at the state level as well, because some states are quirky when it comes to this. They have their own minimums and their own safe harbors. So this may not be as applicable for New York State and New York City. So just check with your accountant on that. The other point that I want to bring up is that even if the safe harbors were not available, if your income was not even throughout the year, meaning it was lumpy, so to speak, and that you received this bonus, it is possible in some situations to minimize the penalties and interest that you're subject to based on estimated tax payments or lack thereof by using the annualized method of calculating those estimated tax penalties. So it's a little bit involved, but essentially splits up the year into 4 sections, and it recognizes that, hey, you didn't earn income evenly throughout the year, so you can't be expected to make estimated payments throughout the year on income that you earned at the end of the year. All right. So that is another way to minimize or eliminate estimated tax penalties that you may be subject to if you received uneven income throughout the year and you didn't have adequate withholdings. Aside from that, let's say the safe harbors are not applicable for you, and if you are not looking to use the annualized method for whatever reason, you're still underpaid with what was withheld from your paychecks, you can make up the difference by adjusting your W-4 for the end of the year, and hopefully your payroll department will take that into account quickly for you and adjust your withholdings accordingly so you can get closer to breaking even when you file your returns. Or you bridge the gap by making estimated tax payments. So if you receive this bonus in June before June 15th, then essentially you'd want to make sure you pay those amounts as soon as possible that were due by the June 15th deadline. Otherwise, there's going to be penalties and interest generally applicable if those other factors that I mentioned, being safe harbors and the annualized method, don't get you out of the penalty zone, so to speak. So there's a few ways to address this before being clobbered with penalties, and you don't necessarily have to rush to pay these amounts in as soon as possible. Just given the facts and circumstances, there may be a way for you to pay those amounts when you file your return and avoid penalties and interest. But again, make sure you double check the situation at the state level. But traditionally, if you don't qualify for any of the safe harbors and the annualized method isn't going to save you, then you either adjust your W-4 if there's adequate time left in the year. Hopefully you can withhold enough to make up the difference, or you can bridge the gap with estimated tax payments. And if you missed a particular deadline, you may want to make those payments as soon as possible. One other thing I would say is that you have to factor in the fact that COVID in 2020 has changed pretty much everything. And the deadlines for tax payments that were due on April 15th and June 15th were generally pushed up to July 15th. All right. So that should reduce the amount of penalties that you would be subject to under the traditional deadlines. But just keep in mind that that's only applicable to 2020 because the deadlines were extended for that year. And again, check with your particular state to see if that's also applicable for you. If you are subject to penalties, it may reduce the total amount that is calculated based on the fact that the deadlines were pushed up in the year. So with that said, midnight sailors or sailors, hopefully this helps add some clarity to your situation. And if you were freaking out before, hopefully you're freaking out a little bit less. And with that said, if you found this video valuable and helpful, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon to be notified of future videos because there will be more. And as always, hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for watching.